Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to TO Residency, which is a workshop. It's a workshop, but also a bit of a marathon because we're going to be together for 5 hours today and looking at how to DIY your own residency in post-industrial cities. I am very interested in looking at this workshop as a conversation as well. And I think my intentions with this workshop are two-sided. So on the one hand, I am mostly trying to lay out, based on my experience organizing residencies and events in Ukraine, I'm trying to lay out a guide or a series of steps that people who are interested could engage in or follow to develop their own residencies, as well as to create a sort of a community of practice. I think it's incredible that there are so many people interested in opening or starting their own residencies in Ukraine. And I thought this would be a great setup for everyone start to know each other and to get this kind of like synergies going. The workshop, because of how it was framed, is mostly aimed at working with the Ukrainian context. But I know that not everyone is based in Ukraine, but a lot of the references or the case studies we will be looking at will be in Ukraine. This, however, I think is very, very exciting. I think for those of you who do not know, who are not Ukrainian, Ukraine right now, I would say, is undergoing a tremendous explosion of residency spaces, of residency opportunities, a lot to do with also urban development and the ways we look at the city. So I think I think it's a great case study also for us to work with. I hope that by the end of this session, you will know, well, I guess you'll have a better overview of how to organize a residency, both in terms of the logistics, but also I think we will discuss a lot ideas of intention and why do we want this residency to happen, or what do we want to get out of this residency. And yeah, hopefully create your own residency if this is what you're interested in. I know that some of you are actually already very experienced in running residency programs. I know that some of you maybe have never even participated or organized a residency program. So I think there will also be some recalibrating to do in order for all of us to be in the same page. I will always be talking from my experience, but everyone's experience is valid. And I think if some of you have a different point of view or something to add, by all means, please do bring it on and do mention it. As I said, I think this is very DIY, very experimental, and very much about mapping. We are going to have, this is the last housekeeping stuff, we're going to have 3 breaks, short breaks, because this otherwise might be a lot of Zoom fatigue. And I think it would be great if those of you who feel comfortable turn on your cameras. But if you prefer to have your camera off, I think that is okay. You will be working in breakout rooms. Oh, hi, Clement. You will be working in breakout rooms at times. So if I understand that there might be certain language barriers at certain points, but I hope that we can kind of like all together overcome these barriers. If you're in a group where you can't communicate and you can't work, either you can sit that one out or do the task by yourself, or come back to the main session, let me know, and I will put you in a group where people speak your language or where you can communicate with people. Okay, cool. So I think the first thing we're going to be doing today is I'm going to introduce you to the tool that we're going to be using. It's mostly, let's see, yeah. Right. So we're going to be working with Miro. I hope that a lot of you are I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this software. I think this has been a very used yeah, I think it's been a very powerful tool in these pandemic times. And I just, before we jump in, before I share the Miro link with you, I just wanted to like navigate with you a bit through this Miro board so that, yeah, we can see a bit where everything is. So anyways, we have, we can begin maybe up here. I don't know why it's lagging a bit now. Okay. So we DIY residencies in post-industrial cities. Welcome. Okay, so we have a wish wall over here. We're gonna look into that in a second. Then over here we have. Wait. Well, up here we have a welcome circle where we're going to be kind of introducing each other. As I said, for me, it's almost more important than the theories and logics and logistics about how to organize a residency to create these networks. Because as I think we will be discussing a lot today, a lot of the residency, oh Jesus, a lot of the residency has to do about creating networks. So anyways, we will have an opportunity to introduce ourselves in here. And then basically all the subsequent spaces will have to do, you know, one side is the first space, then two sides, the second space, the triangle will be the third one. So we will first look at what is a residency and try to define our residency. We will then try to place our residency project or residencies within an ecosystem, both our own city's ecosystem, but also a larger ecosystem of the art or cultural production world. We will also be looking a lot at locations. This workshop is aimed at residencies in post-industrial cities. But it's not only about the city, it's also about where do we host people, but also which channels do we use to communicate our residency ambitions and our portals. We will also be looking at funding and the logistics of the residency. So how do we get money for the residency? How much money should we be getting for a residency? And what kind of skills and people do we need? I will share with you some very basic tables on how to, that you may or may not like to use for your own residency project, but that I found very, very useful in the past. And lastly, we will be looking at who is going to be part of this residency. So the application, and we will look particularly in to the application process. How do we select people? And also power dynamics that are embedded in both the selection process, but also the idea of hosting and being hosted. I have created a Telegram group in here. You can just click on the link and to be added to the group in case you want to continue this conversation after this meeting. And then I have also included up here a resources. a resource star. So basically in this resource star, what I'm trying to do is combine a series of resources that have been extremely helpful to me, both as someone who would go to residencies, but more so as someone, as an organizer of residencies. I will just very quickly go through this because we will not touch upon these resources for the rest of the session, but these are just in this star for you to access whenever you like. So I've arranged them along 5 different categories. First one is glossaries. It's interesting because right now I'm working on a publication that has to do with residency spaces in South America. And one of the first things that came up was the idea of building a glossary. And the thing is that this is not new. Another residency space that I was involved with in Switzerland also developed its own glossary. And it turns out that even a lot of the spaces that were participating in this symposium that I'm part of were also had also their own glossaries. And I think it's important because glossaries kind of give us, they are equalizing in the sense that they help us understand or frame where we are at and what do we mean by certain words. So anyways, I think it's interesting for you guys to have a look at these different examples of glossaries that different residency spaces have organized. One of them is inside this book that is called This Book Is Yours. This Book Is Yours is a book that was edited by Sally de Kunst and a number of other collaborators. Sally de Kunst is right now the director of the Museums Quartier in Bern, Switzerland. And she has definitely been a very influential person in the way I look at residencies. I have learned a lot from her. And actually the event in South America, we're doing it, we're editing that event together. So the links where I put the star, I think are those resources that I find perhaps are more exciting or interesting for all of you. Another category would be networks. So the idea of networks, super important when we talk about residencies. In here, there are 2 tools that I want to highlight. One of them is called Le Club des Opportunités. It's a Facebook group. I believe the settings are too secret or private or whatever. I'm not really on Facebook anymore. But if you apply to go in, they normally let you in within 1 or 2 days. And basically, I have personally found this to be one of the best resources to find residency calls, as well as to publish your calls for your own residencies. It's a community of just maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people, but they're extremely active residency goers and residency seekers and residency offerers, I guess, or whatever. So it's a great resource that I would really recommend, is that one there. And another one is the Reshape Network. The people at Reshape are doing such great work. But particularly in here, this is a network about alternative practices. So this is something that I think is very, very interesting, and definitely a constellation where I find that a lot of the DIY residency spaces, particularly in post-industrial cities, fall under these kind of radically alternative practices where the residency really operates outside a market or operates very much outside, some kind of like fund or pressure from the global market. Another one is, again, another Reshape tool. This one is another link inside their website to a series of tools that I think maybe you will find quite useful in terms of like how to organize residencies, but also different stakeholders. I really feel it's like out of the box thinking. Then in the tools category, I also want to highlight this one, to sell or not to sell, an introduction to business models for arts and culture organizations. Perhaps this document is a bit more on the drier side of things, but I think it can definitely offer you some great insights as well. There is, for example, a Canvas business model, which is this thing where they ask you several questions, especially about your organization and your intentions. And I think it's a great kind of business tool adapted for the nonprofit organizations in the arts and cultural field that I think you might find useful. As I said, we're not going to be touching on that today, but maybe it will work. Then here we have a bunch of theoretical text about residencies. Of these theoretical texts, I haven't highlighted any. I hope you can maybe browse through all of them, but at your own leisurely time. But there are some authors that I would like to highlight. One of them is Bojana Kunst. She talks a lot about the precarization of the cultural worker, and as a residency organizer, you will be part of a cultural worker. And I think it's very interesting to reflect in the precarity of our own field. There is also, well, Nothing Residencies is more like a magazine, Contemporary Artist Residencies by Taru F. Ling and the other writers. It's a great kind of reflection on like theoretical reflection on residency spaces today, or how they can happen. And then I think Taru also wrote this text of Residencies and Future Cosmopolitics. And then lastly, there is Do It Together by Delphine Hesters. Do It Together is more about how do we collaborate. I think when you are making your own DIY residency, collaboration is kind of very much part of the game and very central to your practice, I would imagine. So, I think you might find this quite useful. And the last category, Andrea Felix is also about working together. Also very, very good text. And the last category, I think could be quite interesting. This is about policy and practice. So in here, these are all, of course, very European examples. I think it's because there has been a tremendous explosion of residency spaces also over the past 2 decades in Western Europe. And I think there's been several efforts to find common ground. So, for example, this one of Arts en Résidence, Réseau National, is trying to find a common ethic codes for residencies. What is ethical when you are inviting someone? What is not ethical? What is okay? So I think establishing these kind of red lines, I think it's quite an interesting discussion. That's, and also very, very necessary, because as we will see, these power dynamics are subject to a lot of abuse in the residency, in residency spaces, or in the sphere of the residency. And then lastly, a policy handbook on artist residencies. I think a lot of this policy practice and tools, perhaps this kind of like northeastern section of the star, are things that I can imagine would be more relevant or interesting for those of you working in more institutional frameworks. But as we will see today, you might want to institutionalize yourself, if that means access to funds or to other possibilities. So, okay, so now that we have kind of covered the whole thing, I'm going to be sharing with all of you the link to this Miro board on the chat. Okay. Just one last thing. For those of you who do not know how to use Miro, basically, as the other ones kind of come in, I will just very quickly walk you through. Here on this top side, you will see the faces of the people that are active. In this case, it's my face. If you want to follow someone, you can just double click on the circle, and then that means that you can follow where they're going. And these are tools. Of these tools, the one that I think is perhaps the most useful is the cursor, which is, just quite, a cursor. The T, which would mean be a writing box to write text. And then this pen, which is to draw. The circle, you can also draw different shapes. Right now, we're going to do 2 small exercises for you to familiarize yourselves a bit better with this platform, this tool, if you haven't done so. But for example, right now, I can hover over this person and I am seeing whatever they're saying, or I guess this person is saying the same thing as I am. But if I go here, I'm now following this guest builder. So this, I don't know who this person is, but I'm following them, and I would be able to see whatever they're saying. And if I want to stop seeing them, I just click anywhere in the board and I step out. Anyways, so please, all of you, come onto the Miro board. And I will ask you to, let's all go to this wish wall section, which is here. I am so sorry about the lagging. There is a very intense storm right outside my house. Right. Oh, there was, I believe there was a wall here. Maybe someone deleted it by mistake, or maybe, oh, here it is. Okay, so just please come to this wish wall and just, I mean, this is literally a 5-minute exercise. Well, okay, let's make it 10. It's not really a big deal, but I think it's just about you guys start using these tools a bit more. So just pick a Post-it. You can do it like this, or a text, and just write a wish. You can pick a color, and just write a wish you have for this session, something that you want to get out of this session. As I said, this is more for you to familiarize yourself with the software. Okay, so yeah, let's do this over in 10 minutes. Like, yeah, at 22, we can review a bit. Once you have done anything or written, if there is something you don't want to move, because things do move a lot, often by mistake, I would advise you to lock it. So you can just select on whatever it is that you're writing and then hit the lock, and then people won't be able to move it. Okay, great. Let's, I mean, we still have time, but let's just start looking at some of the comments in this visual have insights about how the cultural sector works and establish contacts with new people, explore the potential of collaboration and acting together in spaces, difference between running a residency in a big city and a small town. I would like to collaborate with foreign-based residency programs for mutual benefit. Yeah, so anyways, let's continue looking for other things. I would like to be better able to address the sustainability of my project, not just in terms of financial resources, but in terms of human resources. Okay, great. These are really, really great wishes. Thank you so much. Okay, so I mean, this was just a short exercise this was the aperitif for what is to come now. I suggest now, I think maybe we could go into the big circle and start introducing ourselves. Oh. Right. So so please go to this hello privy, and you see I did. Oh, sorry. I just basically draw a photo of yours, put a photo of yourself, your name, and maybe a way of getting in touch with you. It can be your link to your Instagram or whatever. This will be like our introduction space. I made a sample. That's me. I will introduce myself afterwards. But yeah, so maybe let's work on this, for the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then very quickly we can just quickly introduce each other to ourselves. As I said, I think it's something so important to establish these connections and this network between ourselves. So I look forward. In Miro is super easy. You can also, if you already have a photo on the internet, you can Google it and copy it and directly paste it, or you can drag it from your desktop directly onto the board. Or if not, you can press this logo here at the bottom with a square and an arrow, and then you can choose to upload it from your device. Okay, great. Let's begin introductions. Maybe let's start here at the top. Thank you. I see that all of you are very well versed in Miro. That's really nice. Maybe we can start here at the top with Luca. Do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Hello.
Hi, Luca.
Hi. So I'm Luca. I'm living in Porto, and I'm a freelance illustrator at the moment. That's basically it. I never done any residency but I've been looking to know more about it on the last months. And let's see if something appears on the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Luca. Okay, next, Clemens.
Hello.
Hi, Clemens.
I'm Clemens. I live in Kiev, but I'm an artist from New York. I moved here 2 years ago to work with Izolatia on a project. I've done several things with them that have variously included things that connect with residencies, although I'm always sort of tangential to it. I am mostly here because Misha told me Eduardo was doing this, and I miss you, Eduardo, so I can.
I miss you too, Clemens.
Yeah, I actually think I'm not sure if I can stay for all of this today because I have other things, but I am really interested in some of the questions specifically because for about over a year now, I've been running a residency in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is not a post-industrial place, but it's basically my cousin and I bought a road sign in Tulsa.
Oh, wow.
And we invite artists to submit their text work, and we put it on this sign. And so at this point, I think we've had like, I don't know, 10 or 12 artists. We have a pretty full program. But my questions about this residency actually, I think, are probably relevant to what a lot of people end up asking after a year of running a program in this DIY way.
Sure.
Which is, my cousin lives in Tulsa, and it's up to her to put this stuff on the sign. And although she is, very willing and very like into the project, I always suspect that when you depend on people to basically work for free, I'm also working for free, but like when you have these kind of collaborations, they're always subject to different stresses from other parts of people's lives. And so I try to be sensitive to that when I make these kind of propositions, but we don't have a good solution for this, like she works full time. It's not always viable. And I worry about her, even if she says she's fine, being fatigued by this responsibility and this kind of thing. So
yeah.
I guess I just wanted to talk about that. I feel like that always goes with DIY as a essential problem, where it's based on this like human energy that is always finite to a certain extent, and like how we can deal with that. And I don't even think it's a question that money always solves. I think that's like, it can be a part of it, but I don't think that that's everything. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you are raising very interesting points here, Clemens, already about the invisible labor as well that goes into, or the uncompensated labor that goes into these projects, and that often is reflected in how long or how little they last in time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Next we have Fyodor.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I can't turn on my camera right now. But yes, I'm an artist from Kiev, and right now I do my works with collective Kiev Loge, and we're interested in some kind of working as a collective of these collective practices. And about residency, we thought a lot that we want to make this DIY residency, and maybe I don't know how. I have never been to a residency, and I'm interested in it because I always think about how it can be look like, which result you can have in residency, because maybe it's not always this, research-based stuff, or
Right.
maybe that you will have this exhibition in the end. I just interested how it can be, in which form, maybe.
Right.
And also how you can do this without a lot of money.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much, Fyodor. You're in the right place. Oh, we have Sasha. Hi, Sasha. Sasha, hello.
Yes, hi. It's me. I'm also working with Izolatia. I'm coordinating residencies, and also have my own residency, which is situated also on post-industrial site, and we are working on digital art. So actually we are fulfilling post-industrial locations with this kind of art.
Amazing. Amazing. What? Where is your residency located?
Kyiv.
In Kyiv?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Like a small, really small spaces. So we are making different educational laboratories there, and making projects on intersection of sound art, media art, and performative practices.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You too.
Pavlo, Pasha. Pasha?
Да, я чую вас. Мене звуть Павло, я малий підприємець, заробляю на життя малим виробництвом, але весь вільний час я займаюся концептуальною фотографією, дуже цим захоплююсь, та й захоплююсь сучасним візуальним мистецтвом. Живу в маленькому містечку на югі, на півдні України. І дуже велике бажання створити щось подібне для молоді, для того, щоб люди бачили і для вивчення якихось моментів, які цікаві молодим людям.
Great. Cool. Okay, thank you so much, Pasha. You are definitely in the right place. Okay, then we have Misha. Okay. Let's see. Oh, well, Misha is talking. This, I think Misha is done. I don't know, still talking in Ukrainian. Okay, great. Sorry, I couldn't, it's so small, I don't know if you were talking or not. Now we have Anna.
Yes, hello. Yeah, it's really nice presentation, and thank you. It was kind of inspiring and exciting. It is exciting and inspiring to be able to be part of this discussion. And actually now I am an artist and a designer based in Warsaw, but now I'm in a very small village in Poland, and I'm doing one event, artistic event, which is called Konteksty, and it's something between residency and collaboration practice, something like this. We are all in a very small village and in Poland. And we have a lot of walking practices, and we play together. We are watching movies. So it's so I'm interested in this kind of exploring the alternative forms of collaboration, spending time together, and how it evolved to something more, yes. And I'm really interested about the progress and how to relate with nature, and that's the thing I would like to explore in my practices. And I would like to also add that I have only my phone, and it's very hard to do these exercises on Miro.
Right.
And yes, and I'm really sorry about that. And I think I'm not sure I will be able to stay all day, but but for sure I would like to maybe, I don't know, check the recording or something like this. But I can also send you a link to this place where I am to check some alternative things and see what is going on here.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much, Anna.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Natalia from Solidar.
Доброго дня. Я Наталя, місто Солидар, Донецька область. Працюю в школі, також співпрацюю з фондом ізоляція і намагаюся щось змінити в власному місті. Дякую, Міша.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Natalia. Okay, I think we've gone through everyone that wrote in here. I don't know if there is anyone that hasn't written anything that would like to say anything, or we could just move on. Oh, hi, Eva. Go. Oh, Eva, I think maybe you're on mute. Yeah. Great.
Привіт, мене бачите? Так? Привіт, мене звати Іва, я з міста Дніпро. Я голова організації «Ксі-простір». Я трохи багато так пропустила в початку, але сподіваюся, подивлюся запис. Мені дуже цікава тема резиденції і різного їх напрямку. Ми от нещодавно, наша організація закінчила арт-лабораторію, яка така в формі резиденції, яка була для молодих митців з Дніпропетровської області, для митців, які живуть у маленьких селищах та містах в області, і у них мало можливостей там, і вони тільки розпочинають свій творчий шлях. І для мене це був дуже цікавий досвід, як для куратора. І я сподіваюся, що ми продовжимо роботу у плані резиденцій, тому що це дуже захоплююче. Це була для нашої організації, це була перша така резиденція, і я дуже б рада була почути про досвід інших учасників і поділитися своїм, якщо це релевантно.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eva. I'm happy you're here. Okay, I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything else. No? Okay, so I will introduce myself. My name is Eduardo. I am an architect by training, and right now I'm based in Bangkok. But before coming to Bangkok, just before the pandemic hit, I was working for 6 years as part of a collective called Metasitu. You can check out our website is here. And we were largely based in Kyiv, but we were traveling extensively. A lot of our projects were in Eastern Ukraine. And we also worked a lot with the format of residency, both as residency goers ourselves and producing residencies. I'll show you in a second. Right now, for the past year and a half, I've been in Bangkok, longer, whatever. I've been in Bangkok. I am teaching here architecture at the University of Chulalongkorn. And I'm also coordinating year 2, so I get to write the briefs and interact a lot with students, and that's great. But yeah, it's interesting because this was supposed to be perhaps more of a temporary thing. I was supposed to go back to Kyiv immediately, and then because of COVID and a set of other circumstances, I got here a lot. I stayed here a lot longer. Also, I play gongs. So these are my 3 things. I'm an architect and I think about architecture. I design. I'm actually right now designing an apartment near the Velodrome in Kiev. I organize residencies. I think about residencies. I write about residencies. And third is I play the gong. I have a small gong cave in my house, and I host gong baths and sound healing sessions, which is something I'm really getting into recently. So I am just gonna share with you a bit my journey for these past 7 to 8 years, because I feel it's very relevant in terms of like understanding how I got into residencies and why I like them. I have links in here to the residencies, but I have highlighted the ones that I thought were the best ones for those of you, because I thought that maybe a lot of people joining today would be interested in doing, like enjoying going on a residency. So here are the tips of which ones I think are very good. But in the process, I'll just start. I'll just share my journey. So basically in 2013, I was doing this postgraduate program that very much operates like a residency, a 9-month residency at the Stroka Institute in Moscow. It was 2013 to 2014. There I met who was to become my partner in work, Liva Dudareva, and together we formed Metasitu. This is me and Liva. And we decided we wanted to work together and to have an artistic practice that explored particularly the way people related to territory and space. Liva is a landscape architect by training. I'm an architect by training, architect and sociologist. So we thought that a lot of the discussions that we were having in Moscow were very much reduced to a very small circle of people. Initially, we thought of staying in Russia, but then it was 2014. The political situation turned really, really horrible. Crimea was annexed. Maidan, everything. And we decided to leave Russia. But in that process of leaving, we didn't have so many means, and we didn't really have a direction of where to go. So we kind of came across our first art residencies, and we decided to do a year of back-to-back art residencies. And we applied a lot, and we literally were like application machines, applying to all these different art residencies wherever we could. And the first place that we went to from Moscow was to Lebanon, where we did a residency called Temporary Art Platform. It was a residency that dealt with a village called Meziara. If you are ever in Lebanon, I highly recommend visiting this village because it's full of extremely unique architecture. Basically, the entirety of the village lives in the diaspora. They made a lot of money, and then in Nigeria or Paris or London or Benin. And then in the summer, for the month of August, just 1 month, everyone goes back to the village, and is this kind of like insane display of wealth, but also forging the connections that they had growing up. Many of them are like third generation Meziarans born outside, but the link to this village is very, very strong. And they were absolutely hospitable. It was a production-based residency. So they were expecting an outcome after 1 month. There was going to be an exhibition, and we had to produce something for that exhibition. And we will get later into that. Here is a link to Temporary Art Platforms because they still have calls. And if the Middle East is a region that interests you, they often have calls open to practitioners from all around the world. So they're a very, very good place to end up. Then we also did another mini residency. It was called Idea Camp in Marseille. It was just 1 week where the selected applicants were brought together to Marseille to discuss ideas about the future of the city. Yeah, it was, again, also kind of, it was almost like a boot camp or like a incubator or something of the sort. And I think this was interesting because it was perhaps one of the first times that I saw in the cultural sphere this format of something so neoliberal or capitalist as an incubator, this kind of Silicon Valley talk, and penetrating the art world. It was very well organized, and it was definitely very, very inspiring. But yeah, it was very much like a boot camp, and there were motivation classes and presentations and group work and splits, and then you have to eat now. And it was very much about being on all the time. Afterwards, we went to Palestine, to the West Bank, where we were for a 3-month residency with DAR, Decolonizing Architecture Art Residency. Now they have rebranded themselves as Decolonizing Architecture Art Research because they no longer live in the West Bank. After this experience, we got another residency. Now we are already maybe 6 months into our back-to-back residency adventure at Studio Das Weiße Haus in Vienna. So in Vienna, it was amazing. We got to live in this abandoned, the former Ministry of Migration, I think it was. It was this very, very large building where just my bedroom alone was around 40 or 50 square meters with a giant bed floating in the middle of this gigantic space. This residency, it's also a production residency. They are expecting an outcome. I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 months, but it's well funded, and you get to live in the center of Vienna. And every couple of years they change buildings, so they are always using very precarious buildings that are about to be demolished or reconverted. In our case, we were the last residents to stay in that building, and then it was turned into luxury apartments. So I put the link there as well. After that, we came to Ukraine, and we came to Izoliatia. So this is why Izoliatia has a very special place in my heart. We came with a program called Architecture Ukraine, and Misha was the first person I saw as soon as I landed at the airport in Kiev. Architecture Ukraine was a very, very interesting residency because it suggested a very strong theoretical framework, which had to do about working with the city of Mariupol. This was the summer of 2015, so the conflict was still quite alive in Mariupol, and I remember there was a series of decisions that Izoliatia made, rightly so, of bringing the residents to Kiev, because at the time Kiev was determined to be safer, and we had visits over the month or 2 months we were in Kiev to Mariupol. It was, as I said, it was very interesting. It was also production driven, but it was a very interesting framework where we got to work with this city, Mariupol, that is absolutely fascinating, but also in terms of the context that was very much alive, intense for different reasons. But definitely it was very, very significant because after that residency, I never really fully left Ukraine. And this is something that we will talk about later on, which is that, on paper, Izoliatia, when the final report for this residency was made, maybe they said, oh, this is how much we spent on the residents, this is what the residents produced, these were the speakers who came, this is how much we spent on their plane tickets. But there are things that are impossible to measure or to calculate, that impossible to frame within that report. One of them is, for example, that both of us, we kind of relocated to Kiev after that. And then all our practice became about Ukraine and developing projects in Ukraine. Another of the residents, Romea, is now working as the director of the educational program at Connections in Kiev. So again, creating another bond with the city, another outcome that I'm 100% certain the team at Izoliatia could not have foreseen. And also Fulco is quite active in master planning and designing in Ukraine. So yeah, it was, and even Anna Balash, she actually moved to Mariupol for a while, I mean years, because she was writing her PhD. After this experience, she decided to write her PhD on Mariupol. So suddenly, out of a cohort of just a few people, you started creating these very strong links to the locale. I mean, this is true for all the other residencies, or not all the other, but some of the other residencies. I feel that Ukraine has a special pull for people for some reason. But yeah, I just wanted to show, because we will talk about this a bit later. Afterwards, we did a residency with a small private art gallery in Brussels. It was really fun. We just got to live at a hotel. There was no expectations. We just got to live there for 1 month. We could come and go as we wanted. That's it. Another residency in Scotland and Norway, the CCA, again, not necessarily production-based, but we had to give talks, which is also something that sometimes they ask. Another residency in Tokyo. This residency is also something that I would recommend, and they are constantly looking for new residents. Tokyo Arts and Space is absolutely incredible in terms of the facilities and the resources they give you. Then a mini residency called Idea City. This is a very interesting model. It's organized by the New Museum in New York, and they partner up with local organizations in different cities around the world. In reality, this residency is a way for the New Museum to earn money, because the host organization that they work with, in this case, was Arles. So we were working with the Luma Foundation, which is this foundation that just opened this Gary Tower in Arles in the south of France. So the host foundation pays a lot of money to the new museum, who then organizes the residency for them at a profit. So it's also an interesting model of how residencies can be a tool for development or for like business advancement, in this case for the new museum. But anyways, if you are a fellow, which was our case, it was pretty nice. And it's a program that I don't think they continue it anymore, but I put the link here because they have calls every now and then whenever they find a partner in a different city. And it's definitely very much to do with urbanism and urban development. They did an idea city in Detroit, which I think would have been very suitable for this post-industrial context. Then ARC, which unfortunately is a project that no longer exists, was a residency in Switzerland in an old kind of convent or pilgrim's house up in the mountains, very, very isolated. And what was very interesting about this program was that the person who ran it, Sally de Kunst, I mentioned her earlier. She's the person from the Museum Quartier. She really thought or challenged the residency model to a very great extent. So she was constantly challenging the residency model and innovating in the format. And every year she would invite residents back to Switzerland to rethink with her the programs. So for example, she had a project, you could apply for a 5-day residency that was a walking residency, where you would just like be walking around. She would also have another section where you could apply with a topic, and she would be in charge of finding other applicant artists that are interested in working with that topic. So you could create a thematic residency, and she would use her connections to bring people that would be interested in exploring that theme. I think what was interesting about ARC, you can still visit the website, that's why I put it, because it's now functioning as an archive, is that it really served a purpose of creating an alternative circuit of validation outside the market and bigger institutions, particularly for research-based practices. At ARC, there was never an exhibition. Actually, there was once kind of like an event where people could come and see your work, but like it was not really production driven. There were no expectations about what you wanted to do or could do. And it was a very, very free model that built through inviting people over and over again, built a very strong network of people that went to ARC. A lot of residents ended up together, forming families or working together. And then just towards the tail end, we did another one in Biella that had to do with revisiting an exhibition that brought together artists working in the CIS countries and artists working in Western Europe. Another one in Zaria that had to do with working with cities that are shrinking in the Far East. And lastly, Al Serkal in Dubai, which again, it's a very good residency that I would really, really strongly recommend. They have open calls for the summer, and otherwise it's invitation. But I think their model is very interesting because they put a lot of emphasis about embedding the artists that they invite in the local community. They organize a lot of networking events. They really make sure that everyone in Dubai knows who you are and you know everyone in Dubai. And although there is some kind of exhibition at the end, it doesn't need to be about finished work. But they do put a lot of emphasis on the idea of parallel programs. So as residents, you are expected to give a talk or to organize a walk or to do something for the community. So it's more about sharing your practice. So yeah, as you see, like this was really a way of survival over these 6 years. We definitely used residencies as platforms for that would give us time and space where we didn't have to think about money or how to make it, but we could just focus on our practice. So this is perhaps why we decided to go for the residencies. But what is interesting is that as this happens, we also decided to explore this format ourselves and organize residencies as part of our practice. So initially we organized a series of short 2-week residencies in Athens called Control TAF. Then we got a grant from the Bosch Foundation in Germany to develop a project in Slavutic, where we brought 7 people from Slavutic in a mini residency to Athens, and we were also working with them. Then further developed that model of residency in Ivano-Frankivsk with city scanning sessions, which is this urban festival that happens every 2 years. And we decided to incorporate that residency as part of the program. Afterwards, we did it again in Slavutic, but this part as part of the festival 86. And we organized an urbanism residency. Then we organized a completely different residency, one that was called Foundation. We will talk about it later, but this was basically about inviting people into a gallery space in Germany and living with them for a week. So the residency is an art project in itself. And then 3 more residencies after City, which again had to do with degrowth and shrinking cities in Eastern Ukraine. We were working in Dobropilia and Mariupol, as well as in Schutzentat in Germany. And then the residency called We Are Never Alone. I'm living here, the ISU, the zine we did with the residents. This residency took place under the umbrella of City Scanning Sessions 2, which was, also in Ivano-Frankivsk, another festival. So, and then through this interest of residencies, this is how I ended today, as I was explaining, with this workshop that has been going on for 3 months. I just finished with all the residency spaces in Latin America, as well as 3 residency spaces from Europe. And now we're working towards a publication. It was organized by Nave, an art space in Chile. I think, this is the link, that organizes residencies in Santiago. And basically we were kind of unpacking all the needs of the residency. And this was very interesting, this insane map of residencies, because we were working with some residencies that were very small, low budget, indigenous residences working in very small villages in the Andes, as well as with Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, which is like a factory of the residencies and churns thousands of residencies a year and has like dedicated buildings. And so, of course, these 2 things are almost not comparable, but at the end of the day, there are several things that are the same. You're hosting people, you're exchanging ideas, and you're building networks. So it was interesting looking at those points of reference. And before we get into the theoretical part, I just wanted to talk one more about another offshoot, which is in here from ARC. One of the things that Sally did, again, questioning the residency, Ash Bulayev, this residency organizer was part of the sessions. He eventually became the residency organizer for Onassis artist residency in Greece. And I've put here the code. I think the Onassis residency in Greece is a very special residency in the sense that it has a very strong theoretical framework. It has a very strong stance in terms of like how they organize residencies, how they produce residencies, and what they're expecting from residencies. So I really encourage you to look through it. And this is something that indeed is kind of also an offshoot of those sessions that Sally was organizing in Switzerland. So yeah, just before we jump into our session, the DIY-ness and all the logistics, I just wanted to kind of map out some residences in Ukraine. This is by no means a comprehensive map of residency spaces in Ukraine. It's just one that I know. So please, if you know of other spaces, feel free to put the links on this map or whatever. There is one, sorry, no rooms available, which is in hotels La Carpatia in Uzhgorod. It's a very interesting residency, very much DIY. What they just give you is a room, and I think there are no real expectations in terms of like the production or what you do. I think it's very much about building a network in there. Another one that I wanted to highlight is Platform 2, that although it's not an active residency program, they have hosted residencies in the past, and it's in Mariupol, and I think they do such a phenomenal work. Diana Berg is the director, and they work a lot with the assets they have, which is basically access to a very large space. Yeah, I think it's really, really incredible. This is their website, and that's their Facebook, in case you want to follow them. And then, of course, in Kyiv, we have Izolyatsiya, which I think is perhaps the most consistent and established residency program in Ukraine. Yeah, I'm not going to say much about it. But yeah. And then we also have Shoshenko 33, which, yeah, it perhaps is not as consistent, but it started also as an artist residency of sort, even under Soviet times, and then kind of is evolving. Then I'm putting here also Sesame 2021, which is a residency I am organizing. It's going to take place in August in Slavutic. And due to the pandemic, we have split it into 3 cycles of, 3 shorter cycles instead of 1 longer cycle. But basically, we will be bringing hundreds of architecture students to work together, and much more than a production base, although there are workshops and things like that, because it's definitely operating under the EASA brand, which is the European Assembly of Students of Architecture. Is definitely about creating networks. And lastly, there is Project Diffusion. And the reason why I'm bringing Project Diffusion is because it's in Kramatorsk. And this is the residency that kind of like really made me start thinking a lot about the power of DIY residencies in post-industrial spaces. I was in Dobropilia for work, and then we got in touch with these people in Kramatorsk. They invited us to the residency space, which was a residential house in the sort of outskirts of Kramatorsk. And I entered, and there was a girl from Japan who had never been to Ukraine. She'd been in Ukraine for a week, and she basically went from Kyiv to the train station, from the train station to Kramatorsk. I think it was maybe even her first time in Europe. And she was sharing with me her impressions about the residency and her impressions about Europe and Kramatorsk. And I just felt it was so powerful. Because I felt that Kramatorsk, perhaps as a post-industrial center, was something that would not necessarily be on the travel route of a tourist coming to Ukraine. And I started really thinking about the power of bringing people to these centers, and how really residencies could be not just, of course, provide space and do all of these things that I've sketched out very briefly before, but how DIY residencies can really be acts of activism and even almost like acts of resilience. I thought that another thing that was really interesting is that these residencies were very much about the act of hosting and the generosity that is involved in that. Sometimes because the funding is so small, they can only provide you with a house. But I felt that it was so powerful to just be in a position to offer someone a place to stay and this person to come over. and to a place that, as I said, would maybe not necessarily be on a mainstream route of people coming to Ukraine. And also the type of community that you build with this type of actions. The act of bringing someone to you, but also the ripple effect that this creates and this generates. So I think this was definitely some things that really made me think, like the outcomes that are really out of your control, the type of communities and catalysts and encounters that you spark from being someone from the East Asia all the way to Eastern Ukraine, and have them be there for 1 month and interact with that environment. And I thought it was really, really powerful. So yeah, this is how I kind of, this was maybe the framework that I used as a departure in here. So I think now I will just very quickly go through this, through the first kind of moment. So I think the most important thing is for us to define what is a residency. And in terms of, like, as I said, you know, like, this is something that the definition of a residency is something so vague. I mean, I guess it involves maybe some kind of like overnight, or some kind of like residing. But I think the time scale varies. Some residencies last up to a year. Some residencies are micro, very, very short. So I think it's important also to establish what kind of networks or what kind of frameworks do we have. So what do we mean by an art and urbanism residency? Do we mean artistic research and production? Do we mean as something that gives you time to produce or to reflect? Something that gives you space? Something that gives you a financial support of some sort, either in the form of a financial, of a production budget, or maybe in-kind support? Is it about networking and building a network of people and acquaintances, practitioners? Is it about looking for new collaborations and sparking new forms of working together? I think, of course, then there is another element that, as I said, is very kind of baseline in terms of residencies, which is the notion of hosting. So, of course, you're inviting someone into your space as someone who is organizing a residency. And I think it's interesting, we will talk about this later, the power dynamics that are built with that, but like the idea of the guest versus the host, particularly because when you translate it into some languages, such as in French, the words are the same, hôte versus hôte. To be a guest and to be a host is the same word. And I think this is an interesting notion. It comes in English, it comes from the same root, Latin, hospes, which indeed means host and guests. And then I guess in French, it stayed the same, whereas in English, we made that division. But yeah, I mean, for example, the word hotel would also be from the same root. But is the hotel referring to the hosts or to the guests? I guess the root is in the Latin, so. But I think there are other definitions of host, which I think are also quite interesting because like, for example, the idea of hostis, a different Latin root, which is the enemy. So we are immediately already creating this sense of otherness. Or a third definition for host, according to Google, another root from Latin, coming from ostia, which means victim. Of course, this host is the religious host or whatever. But, I think it's interesting how these different enemy, victim, and guest/hosts have converged into one word in English. A word that is so quintessential and so important when we think about art residencies, the idea and the politics of hosting. Then in terms of typologies, we've already discussed some, but like the idea of the context, some of the residencies are extremely mission-driven. Some residencies are autonomous. Some, on the other hand, are DIY, which are more kind of like they appear, and as Clemens was saying, maybe they rely on very informal routes or very informal networks. Some of them are incorporated in a very large institution, which means that they can plan ahead, they have a guaranteed budget. Other people are dedicated to look for funds, other people are dedicated to look for accommodation. So it works as a much bigger engine. They can also be thematic, like the one I was talking about, Architecture Ukraine. A lot of them are often open call, but I think it's also important to understand that a lot of residencies are operating in an invitation-only basis. And who has access to those invitations and who sends out those invitations is something we will be looking at as well. Some are production-based. Some are paid in the sense that you get money for your time spent on residency, or at least you get per diems or a certain production budget. Some are unpaid, but you get access to a space, a place to sleep, a place to work, food. And some you actually have to pay for. So they become whole other entities, residencies for profit, or maybe they're not necessarily for profit, but just to cover costs. Sometimes residencies are individual events, and sometimes they are the collective things. So, as I said, I think this was just kind of like a very wide overview of what we mean when we talk about residencies and how vast the variations are. And I think basically the first type of question you should be asking yourself when you're making your residencies, what kind of residency would you like to create? Is it single? Is it a very moderate thing? Is it an on and off kind of thing? Is it a systematic, a regular, cyclic thing? Lastly, well, the outcomes. What kind of communities are you creating? In terms of like outcomes, like is your residency outcome driven or not outcome driven? I think this is also quite interesting. It's about creating communities among practitioners around the residency, but what is your community? And lastly, I think this is a very, very important point also to consider is again, the idea of resilience and activism. Because I think that creating a DIY residency in post-industrial centers are very much about that. It's about changing a certain narrative, is about being able to control also the narrative of that place. It's also about operating in something that I like to call a borderland, but not necessarily a periphery, because a lot of the things or the conversations that are taking place in here are taking place, outside power hegemonies of the center. So often they're very, very interesting. So this was maybe my first wide overview of the residency. I think maybe now, since we've been almost for 1.5 hours, me mostly talking, we could have a short 10-minute break, and then we could get back and do a short 10-minute exercise and continue looking into the the intentions and the reasons why we should be organizing residencies. Okay, so we will come back at 5 to noon, I guess, 5 to 12. Cool. Thank you, everyone. I don't know if there are any questions or anything. If there are, just feel free to ask.
I have a little question.
Sure.
So I didn't mention about it, but also we have such, I don't know, problem to apply as a collective. Can you tell a little bit about this experience to applying as a collective? Because we could do some, results from this rejection, but every time we don't have even a mail that we are not get in some residency or something, so we don't know actually what to think why we don't pass, because there are a lot of people and they can fund all of them or I don't know. So yeah.
Sorry. Just to wrap, to get my head around it. So your question is about people applying in collectives or not, like in duos?
No, my question about this experience of applying as a collective, not a single person.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, for us it was definitely challenging because not everywhere accepted duos. So of course, this is something we would always try to aim for. And whenever we organize residencies, we've even accepted groups. I think maybe up to 3-4 people. I think maybe more than 4. Maybe it becomes a whole other thing. And maybe you need to have a larger infrastructure to accommodate for that. But yeah, it's definitely very complicated, particularly because, and I think this is a much bigger problem in the field of art residencies, is the idea that often the selection process is drawn along lines of nationality. So basically they're looking for applicants from a specific country or with a specific passport. So for example, the residency that took place in Scotland and Northern Norway was a residency specific for people from Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Liva has a Latvian passport, so we were able to apply, and securing her place, I was able to come as well, but my expenses were not covered. But the house was the same, so then it worked out. But yeah, it's definitely a lot more challenging applying. I mean, I just very quickly went through the last, I think it was, where I was talking about multiple residents. So yeah, having more than one, multiple residents coming at the same time from the same group, the same application, is definitely something that not a lot of spaces initially accepted. And I think this has to do with the mentality of outcome-driven residencies. Because if you are waiting for a lot of artworks, this means you're paying twice as much for one artwork as opposed to having 2 artworks for the same amount of money. So I think it comes very much from that type of logic. And I think that this is some of the things that the residencies that are DIY can start challenging, this notion of the production. Who are we interested in having here? I think this is one of those things that can definitely be challenged. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, in some way. Thank you. Actually, I just was maybe wondered how big % of residencies that you applied were rejected because of you're a collective and you applied as a not 2-person but this collective name.
Sure. You know, Fyodor, that's such a good question because actually we used to have a tally and I don't really remember what was our percentage, but I think maybe we got accepted in 1 out of every 3 years. I don't really remember actually. I no, maybe that's wrong. I think it would, and there were definitely some residencies that we really, really wanted to get, and some others we maybe accepted more because they helped us survive, especially in the earlier years when we were not very financially stable. I think as time went on, we had other sources of income as well, and our situation was a lot more stable. So we were able to be a lot more constrained or like selective as well about what kind of projects we engaged in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's meet at noon exactly. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, great. So today we will do 3 short activities collectively, and this is just the first one of them. I just wanted everyone to get to know each other a bit better, and I thought that organizing some small group activities where you can maybe have a chance to interact with each other better would be a great way of knowing each other. So the first activity is going to be called the residency you want. So it's about defining the residency. So right now we're gonna go into breakout rooms. I'm gonna assign them randomly. As I said, if you are in a breakout room because the translation will not be working, if you are in a breakout room where you suddenly see that no one shares the same language, please come back to the main session and I will reassign you to a different room. But the task is fairly simple. Each of the rooms will have a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you are in room number 1, you should be working in this set of Post-its. If you are in room number 2, in this set, room number 3, this one, room number 4, this one. And basically, I'm gonna ask you that for the next 15 minutes, collectively, the 3, 4 of you in the group, come up with questions that you would ask someone trying to establish their residency. Like, what kind of questions will help someone define their residency? Like, for example, is your residency outcome driven, or is it more about, is your residency outcome driven could be a question. Or is your residency site specific? Is it self-funded, etc.? So over the next 15 minutes, each group should fill out their questions in the red column of their corresponding room. And it's great if you could like talk together and discuss why those questions and why those questions are important in order for people to define their residency. So let me look into the breakout room. Okay, so I'm gonna assign the breakout rooms now. You're gonna get an invitation and you just have to accept, press join. Okay. Let me see. Let me find out. Okay. Great. 1, 2, 3. The rooms are open, and in 15 minutes I will close them.
Sorry to ask again. The questions you were mentioning that we should formulate.
Yeah.
What are they about?
So about defining the residency space that you. So what kind of questions would you ask someone about their residency? So is your residency, how long does your residency last, for example? Or where is your residency? Or what kind of things do you cover? You know, this type of questions that help us define the residency. But I think you can work by yourself if you want, or you can join the group that you were assigned in room number 1, if you prefer, Lucas. Do you know how to join the breakout room?
I'm afraid no.
No?
But okay, I think I found it.
Great.
I'm gonna click there.
Okay. Okay, hey, thank you. Teletransported back to the main session. Okay, I see that group 1 was like really, really prolific. And I think maybe group 2 struggled a bit more. And then group 4, Fyodor, great. Okay, so what I wanted to do now was basically that different teams would swap and then answer questions that other teams had written, but individually. But because there have not been that many questions, I think maybe what we could do is put together the questions from group number 4 and group number 1 together, and then everyone kind of answers individually based on, I'll just do it really quick.
Yeah, Eduardo, I think we had so many questions because we were like all Isolazia related people. So we're like already in this.
Right.
Yeah.
I just looked at question group 1 and thought that I should not ask the same question. So
that's great. You know what? I think it's great because I think maybe this could be, as I said, a basis for all of us to answer these questions. So I think now what I would suggest is, so now we basically have a lot of questions. Luckily, they're not repeated because Fyodor making sure he was not asking the same questions. So what I'll do is I'll bring some columns closer and then just, okay, let me. Okay, that's great. So I think now just assign yourselves a column. Maybe, okay, I can kind of do it. I can do it maybe You know what? No, I think it's maybe each of you start picking a column, just answer the first question, and then you can claim that column for yourself, and then answer the questions in order. For that, again, we will have 15 minutes, but it's individual. And I think this can either be of a residency program that you are already running or the residency program that you would like to run. So start defining a bit what kind of residency you're thinking about when you're saying residency. So yeah, at like 22, we will kind of resume with a small discussion. Okay, cool. I think this time everyone was a lot quicker. Let's just go through some questions. Just because we're doing a bit bad on time, I will maybe, like, I don't know if there is something that like surprised you or that anyone wants to comment, please jump in and say. But okay, I'll just read out the question. So what kind of agenda comes with financing? Okay, that's quite interesting. If anyone wants to say anything, I will just read the question. If anyone wants to say anything, just, yeah, unmute yourselves. What is the objective of the... yeah, Eva, go.
Доброго дня ще раз. Я хотіла... У мене такий інсайт був, коли я почала заповнювати, дуже пізно почала заповнювати, тому що розбиралася з платформою, але все ж таки багато питань зорієнтовані на тому, що резиденція дуже залежить від локації, і багато питань щодо локації і тому, яка тема резиденції. І якщо резиденція не сконцентрована на досвіді, який дає саме місце, то складно відповідати на багато з питань. І це такий дивний момент. В принципі, ми багато говоримо про гостинність, про те, як хто зустрічає, як, і про простір для роботи, але все ж таки мені здається, що багато резиденцій сконцентровані просто на те, щоб привести людину, митця, у якесь нове, незнайоме для нього місце. І якщо це не так, то якось дивно відповідати на такі питання.
Well, I don't know if I got everything correctly in what you're saying, Eva, but I definitely think that, yes, indeed, in many residencies, the location plays a very, very important role. And I think within the framework of today, we're thinking more of post-industrial cities, which would be, our main focus. But I mean, I can definitely imagine a residency that is happening in a post-industrial center that is not about bringing people that are not familiar with post-industrial cities. Like, as I was saying, for example, After City was a project that we did last year where for 10 days we brought urban activists and practitioners from different locations in Eastern Ukraine to Mariupol, which is a city that they all had been to and they knew. I think all of them had been to. But it was not so much about them being in Mariupol and exploring Mariupol and looking for solutions for Mariupol, but rather them building some kind of like community of practice, discussing certain ideas. So I guess this could be another angle to tackle those difficult points that you bring up. Is that, yeah, satisfactory of an answer? I don't know if I completely missed your point or...
Так, я дуже розумію те, що каже Едуардо в плані спільного досвіду, тому що у нас була така сама проблематика трохи, бо художники приїжджали з Дніпропетровської області, і вони вже були у місті Дніпро. І у них є вже якесь розуміння, якось вони сприймають вже цей образ міста, тому складно було на цьому засновувати свою резиденцію. А ми хотіли більше сконцентруватися на досвіді, на співпраці, і це трохи інший такий кут для того, щоб займатися резиденціями.
Right. Right. I mean, I think this is also the next chapter. Right after this, we're going to be looking at the intention of the residency and why we're looking for a residency. But I think that definitely understanding the intention of like, what is it that you want to do with a residency? And if in this case is bringing people into a city and explore urban themes or explore the city, then I think it's important to understand as a residency organizer, how are you going to be able to address or to channel a lot of the discussions along those angles, if it makes sense. Yeah. I will kind of continue going down very quickly through the list, what kind of space. Okay, this is amazing. I can see already multiple different options. Will the resident get paid? This is very, very important. What kind of reporting assessment comes with a funder's agenda? That's great. I can tell that I'm giving this is a workshop between residency organizers. This is not a question that I would say residents often care about. But yeah, very, very important. What type of reporting? For example, I have experience working with the Visegrad Fund, which is a quite generous grant for residents. The residents have to be from the Visegrad countries, which are Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary. And I think they also have other partner countries like Serbia and maybe Ukraine as well now. Anyways, it's a great fund. We got it for the urban residency we organized in Slavutic in 2018. But it was such a pain in the ass to do the reporting that I think personally I will never work with Visegrad Fund ever again, because it put so much labor on the organizer side, that labor that also had to be outsourced. Anyways, it was very, very complicated. So I absolutely think that this is a very important question. And also in terms of like furthering a type of agenda. For example, the Bosch Foundation in Germany, which funded part of my project in Slavutic, 14th district, they completely restructured the goals of their foundation. And now they are no longer investing as heavily in Eastern Europe. It's not their priority anymore. Pro Helvetia is very heavily investing now in South America, but as soon as there is a political change or a change in mission, that definitely also affects the funding. So I think this is also important. Planning horizon for the program? Yeah, absolutely. What tools do you use to stay current with finding opportunity? We don't. The host capabilities with access to local context. This is definitely very important, particularly in contexts. I mean, we're going to be talking about the vulnerability of your guests, but I think in contexts where there is no clear connection, yes, it's very, very important. Collaborative aspects of the program. We'll be learning program at the residency. From where will residencies be accepted? Indeed, this is a very powerful and complicated question, because a lot of the funding, I will share a study later, but it's a lot of, I think it's 85% of residencies in Europe are currently funded by some form of governmental body. And largely governmental bodies will try to reinvest this money into either their own citizens or people living in their country. And interestingly enough, it's often about people going abroad rather than people from abroad coming to them. So this is also interesting, because we need to think of also what kind of power dynamics and power lines are we permitting or allowing or replicating. But I mean, of course, sometimes this is the money, that's where the money comes from. So we might as well do it. And yeah, the idea of collectives, which is something that came up earlier. Absolutely. As I said, we're doing a bit bad on time. So I'm just gonna, I don't think we will have time to discuss all of the answers. But yeah, anyways, I hope we can have a look at it maybe during the break or something like that. Now I wanted to jump to the second part of today, the second of the 5 stages, which is maybe the reasons, the why. Why? What are our intentions with the residency, and why do we? Why do we want to create this residency space? What are we trying to achieve? Is it, as Eva was saying, people engaging with a city? Or is it about people engaging with each other? What are the reasons? So yeah, I think understanding and defining your intention is something very, very, very important. And I think particularly in the context of looking into residences in post-industrial centers, I mean, I think there is one clear objective, which is, of course, bringing people to places that are not necessarily part of a mainstream drive-through. Places like Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, or CKU in Berlin, or Delphina Foundation in London. These are places that people would, of course, go through and transit, that have very good art markets. I understand that in post-industrial centers, there can be an intention of bringing people, and just the act of bringing someone can be very radical and very nice. But I think beyond bringing someone to your place, what else is there that you would like to explore? Here I want to talk very briefly about my experience with City Scanning Sessions 2017. City Scanning Sessions was, I think it's here. It was a festival, it's a biennial, it's happening every 2 years in the city of Ivano-Frankivsk and Stanislav. And basically, for the first session, they invited us to kind of curate or organize the festival. And one of the elements that we included was a residency. At this point, Ivano did not have, I think it was the beginning of this renaissance that right now Ivano is going through, this kind of urban renaissance with incredible initiatives such as Urban Space 100 or the Prompt Renovation, Parasolka, Teple Misto. So this is 2017, and it's crazy for me to think that all of these things have happened in a very short time span of just 4 or 5 years. So before, in 2017, when right at the beginning of this type of Renaissance, they wanted to organize this festival. It was going to be an international festival, and they wanted to have residents. We decided to make the theme, the idea of role models, because we thought that particularly in the city of Ivano, there was a lot of pressure from a lot of different groups to adapt their city to what certain groups of people determined to be more European or more classical. For example, there was a very active demonization of anything that had to do with what was considered tacky, like shop signs with neon lights or like fluorescent lights. There was a very conscious effort in beautifying the city, following the Venice canon of restoration, and incorporating a lot of imported role models that I don't know if they would necessarily work in the context of Western Ukraine or Ivano-Frankivsk. So we use this residency as an opportunity to invite people to learn from Ivano. And so that instead of Ivano becoming the importer of role models, becoming some kind of exporter of good practice. So yeah, anyways, this is the brochure. It's called City Scanning Sessions. You can have a look. I think this was very interesting, as I said, in terms of like giving this type of guidance to the residency. On the other hand, for 2 years later, when we came back, but this time instead of doing the whole festival, we were only in charge of the residency. The residency was called We Are Never Alone. And it was very interesting because this is when the renovation of Promprilat, the very large factory, was finishing. And we were invited to actually question that model of renovation, to question that model that was very much relying on a very kind of classical model of gentrification of a post-industrial space, turning it into some form of cultural hub. So with that in mind, we made an open call for residents to look into that. At the same time, looking into what were the very interesting things to be extracted from this experience of Promprilat. And one thing that we had noticed in these 2 years, from 2017 to 2019 in Ivano, was that there was a very strong growing sense of community. So also with that, with the idea of exploring friction and community and solidarity networks, that's how we framed this residency. So people that applied often had an interest either in working with post-industrial spaces, such as factories, or had been researching gentrification for a long time, or they were exploring different models of growth and degrowth. So it was quite something. And as I said, it was also kind of like a very directed effort. So in both of these cases, I would say the format of the residency was somehow relatively similar. The first edition was a lot shorter, the second one longer. But the intention and therefore the participants we had were completely different. And the communities they created were also absolutely different. I guess in one, it was almost anthropology-like enthusiasts that were very interested in exploring what was going on in Ivano-Frankivsk and kind of amping that up and extracting those dynamics and like really importing them back to their home cities. Whereas in the second edition, people engage with communities in a much more different way. A lot of people engage with space. the residents often met to discuss their theoretical frameworks, like as strangers not living in Ivano-Frankivsk and working with this very large radiator factory in the center of the city. So it was a very interesting dynamic in that way. And I think a reason and intention, of course, behind residencies is the idea of value creation, which is something kind of, undoubtable. This following extract is from Sarah Thelwall from her volume Size Matters. I think it's in the resource star in the kind of theory section. And this extract I've done from slides prepared by Sally de Kunst, who synthesized Sarah's theories in very succinctly. So, of course, first there is artistic value, which is intrinsic to the objects and ideas that are commissioned. Then Sarah identifies another form of value, which is the social value, which is the process by which art is valued within the art ecosystem. How expensive, how validated is something within an art market, or how desired is an outcome. Another one is societal value. So how much that's the broader social value that is made tangible through the public participation. Something can maybe be of little social value, like very mainstream art, but have a lot of societal value. I'm trying to think of examples, but maybe some kind of mural that is not done by a particularly acclaimed artist, but that people feel very connected to, would fall in that category of having a lot of social value. So everyone likes that mosaic or whatever, but maybe it doesn't have, it's not artistically, it doesn't have importance in an art historic context, or it doesn't have artistic value. It's not like well done. Then there is fiscal value, which ranges from the initial cost of producing the artwork to its sale in the primary market, followed by the resale. So how much is something worth? Oh, it's like 20 million. This artwork cost the city 5 million hryvnias. You know, it's that type, but it's also the artwork, the price that goes at auction. Unfortunately, often we immediately relate the success in the art or cultural sphere to this fiscal value. But I think there are a lot of types of artworks or artists that could maybe counter that. Like, for example, someone like Cause, the artist that makes this kind of like big sculptures, has a lot of fiscal value in the sense that his works go for hundreds of millions of dollars, but there is very societal or social value to the works. And I think, unfortunately, often when we think about residencies, although very few, I don't know of any residency that would like be so concerned about the market value of an artwork at the end, there is definitely often an idea of outcome and production and showing and displaying something that has been made. Because determining that value, the value of that out product, justifies the entire process. However, what Sarah, one more thing is that, of course, residencies also can have a very large impact in terms of fiscal value in the communities around them. And I guess this goes without saying, bringing in people, particularly when we're thinking about post-industrial cities, maybe in places that are less populated, and bringing in a lot of people generates a form of economy that has clear implications. And then Sarah was talking about a last form of value, which is the value where city residencies engage with the most, which is the idea of deferred value. So working with artists, taking risks, and this is a type of value that emerges later in time. So I think if we are to think of an residency ecosystem, I would say that residencies often fall within this category of deferred value, where the outcome of what they are producing is only visible or becomes very manifest later on. I think in terms of this, the text of Residencies and the Future of Cosmopolitics that is in the resource star is a very good resource to think more about value and value creation. Okay, this is all for value. The next chapters are more perhaps in terms of logistics, how to apply for things and how to deal with things. But I wanted to get sorted what do you mean by residency and what is your intention with a residency? I don't know if there are any questions now. No? Okay, great. So I know that now is lunchtime in Ukraine. Ah, yeah, Lucas.
When you were talking about the fiscal value, that's I think I'm very curious about that. Because usually, like, if the government, for example, is giving funding for an institution and they are offering a residency, usually what you were talking about, the fiscal value, in which like the final result may sort of bring back what was given in expenses. As like for art, it can be difficult because art has somewhat of value from like our own, it ends up being a lot about taste. So it's like perceivable value in the eyes of the beholder, let's say it like that. We could put the price we want in like any artwork. So that's sort of my concern. Usually, because I'm not experienced in residencies, usually when you're in a residency, do they have this pressure over you as an artist for you sort of to make the money back, in which they spending?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your question. No, as I was saying, I normally I don't think residencies are very concerned about the fiscal value of an artwork. However, the reason why I continued mentioning it is because most residencies are definitely concerned with some kind of output. They want to see how their money has been put to use and how that money has crystallized in the form of an artwork, which is why in that regard, there is a lot of pressure in a lot of residencies for you to produce something at the end of 1, 2, 3 months. And it might not necessarily be of good value, fiscal value, but residency spaces that are production driven and have this outcome requirement would say that, right? They would be like, oh, we need to. And this is really a shame because, as I was trying to explain, like the output of a residency very seldom is whatever crap you've come up with in 4 weeks that you have just arrived in one place, 1 week to get over jet lag, another week to get used to the food and the weather, and another week to start meeting people, and then 1 week production. It's like a really crazy schedule. However, maybe what they're missing out is that you maybe have made a friendship or a connection, or maybe you have partnered up with someone, or maybe your lecture on something triggered something else. And these type of actions very seldom make it to reports because they're very hard to measure. As I was giving the example with Izolatia, it's impossible. And I'm on very good terms with everyone at Izolatia. I think they're great, but it's impossible for them to know the impact that Architecture Ukraine had, unless, of course, they hire some kind of like researcher that retrospectively goes back, tracks all the residents, and then can assess, oh, wow, look how successful that program was, and try to find the reasons. There was this foundation, Fetrinelli, Fondazione Fetrinelli, I think it is. I'm not, oh no, it's a different one. It's this foundation, I think it's this foundation that works in the Mediterranean. I have it at the tip of my tongue. Anyways, they actually did this. They run a very thorough research to reevaluate the outcomes of the residences they were funding. So this foundation basically funds trips. They don't organize residencies. So they retrospectively looked back and they were looking at all the ways people were, like how far did their money go? So because clearly it was not just about paying. In our case, they paid for our tickets from Spain to Beirut. So it was not about paying just one plane ticket, but they wanted to know, years later, they contacted us and they were like, okay, how did that trip manifest later on? How did it unfold? And I think this type of initiatives is great, but of course it's very expensive and not always possible. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Luca. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments at this point? Okay, great. So yeah, as I said, it's lunchtime now in Kyiv. So let's have a 30-minute break just to grab something quick to eat, and then we can continue. We will have just a bit over an hour right after. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. See you in half an hour. Hi, everyone. Hi, Grace. Okay. So I am just gonna go. Sorry, it's just a really epic storm happening right outside. I'm just gonna continue and go over the three last kind of like short sections we have, and then we can finish with just one exercise together / discussion. Talking about fairness. Okay, so my next point is going to be about location. Where is the residency? And of course, not just in terms of like the location as in like a city or a space, but also where do we advertise it? What kind of spaces are we generating? So in here, I wanted to talk about 3 scales. First, the extra large scale, the scale of receiving. So I think the space for receiving, I think this is the scale of our city or the location and the context in which we are receiving people, receiving guests. I think something that is very important for us to take into consideration is that here is where the national jurisdiction of where our residency is situated comes into play. For example, just out of a personal experience now with Sesame, we are having trouble bringing in participants from Belarus that had applied and had been accepted, because Belarus and Ukraine do not have yet some kind of entrance agreement because of the COVID situation. But this affects the residency not only in times of a pandemic, but in very, very different times. So, for example, the idea of visa-free versus going with a visa. If you are an individual and doing a DIY residency and you have a resident from India that would need a visa to come to Ukraine, you might not be able to offer that service. Whereas if you were an institution, you would a registered institution, you would probably be able to submit an invitation letter. So I think this is also important to understand, because I feel that these elements cannot be overlooked. The idea of how much the jurisdiction or the location influences your work is very, very important. Again, 30 days, so that's why so many residencies are just 1 month long or 3 months long, because making them 4 months long, for example, would often require a type of visa arrangement that a lot of residency spaces prefer to avoid by kind of bringing residents under the pretense of tourism. Another question is, how do you integrate your residents in the local context? And it's interesting because this is a question that I saw some of you ask in that first exercise. So for example, at 86, we would organize weekly brunches that were open to everyone. There were potluck brunches. So everyone in Slavutic could come to these very long tables that we would set up. We would all be sharing food, and we invited normally guest speakers to talk about a topic. We found that this model was quite successful. Al Serkal, the residency that I did in Dubai, a way of integrating us residents in the Dubai context was having lunches. And although they gave you a per diem, I think there were very few meals that were not, where you were not kind of invited to have meals with different stakeholders of Dubai, because through eating, they wanted to really integrate you in this type of local context. So, I mean, I guess food is a very good tool, but how do you navigate other barriers? So, such as language, for example, or translation, as well the notion of politics. There are several landscapes where it's very complicated, very, very difficult. Just for example, when we were in Mariupol doing the residency at Izoliatia, I remember there was a moment where one of the participants crossed a bridge and some soldiers stopped him, and he was so confused. He was not sure which soldiers were these, and I guess this would have been a very clear situation had he been a bit more familiar with the local context. But I believe Alessia, one of the coordinators of the residency, had to go and kind of rescue him from a police station. So I think these are all important things to understand how we're navigating, as well as, of course, what is the constellation of partner spaces that we have in these spaces. And another important point I wanted to bring is also, how are your residents distributed in that space? Is your residency space consisting of rented flats and a centralized working space? This is, for example, how the vast majority of residencies that I have organized have worked. We had a central working space, and residents were distributed across different flats, some of them rented through Airbnb in the city. But of course, with a lot of self-reflection, also I started thinking, why are we putting labor at the center of the residence experience? And I think this, again, comes from this idea of production and of outcome-driven residency. Why are we centralizing the space for working and disseminating the space for living. I think we're clearly enforcing or sending a message out there. I was also thinking of alternative models where the residents all live together, but instead they work in different places according to their production needs or their wishes for the residency. So I think, and these are things that I honestly just thought a few months ago after having done several residencies and realizing how still, although we really thought and rethought all these processes, we were still very much product-oriented, product-driven. Then if we scale down and we just go to the large scale and we just look at the space where the residents are being hosted, or where they're sleeping and the places where they're working. I think there is an interesting case study here, which is Idea City. I mentioned it before, is that initiative from New Museum. So a way Idea City keeps its costs down massively is that the place where Idea City takes place on every occasion is a massive warehouse. And they designed a series of sleeping pods that can be deassembled and flat packed and shipped in shipping containers across the world. So then suddenly you can pop up these residency spaces for 50, 70 people at a fraction of the cost that it would be to have all those people living in flats for a week, particularly in cities like Singapore or New York, where they've held these events. But another very interesting case study is the Capacete. Capacete is a residency space that used to be in Rio de Janeiro. It went on for 23 years, and they just had to close because of the pandemic. Through my research and work, I had the chance of talking to the founder, Batista, and he was talking about the evolution of Capacete and how it started very much DIY, and then how at some point Capacete decided to become almost like a service provider. So what they did is they created a series of like a board of art experts, where in order to receive the service from these art experts, you had to pay a fee. So basically it was aimed at very wealthy art collectors in Brazil so that they could finance the residency. Now, 80% of the money of the residency went to rent flats for the residents in Rio de Janeiro. And this guy, the former director, was telling me that although they felt they were very financially smart by creating this board and providing this service and making the contact with the artist as something that collectors would be willing to pay for, which of course then also open a whole other set of questions in terms of your selection process, because you want to be able to invite people that are able to make that experience worth it for that collector, for that funder. But that's a whole other conversation. But they could have invested in buying assets, in buying flats, and with those flats being able to survive financially over the course of 23 years. I mean, of course, now this is easier said than done, and the pandemic kind of like wiped out the whole project. But it's interesting that in this case, that the hosting or the space that you have is definitely an asset. And I think there are definitely opportunities in terms of understanding how this asset can help the sustainability of the project. Just as a very quick side story, I think it is Curators International that had a very beautiful Frank Gehry designed building in Paris. And when the last, or I don't know if it's the previous director, came on board, his first decision was to sell the building, because with that he would create an investment fund that would ensure the sustainability of Curators International and their programs and their So in that case, the only asset that Curators International had was a building, and there was no other way of survival than for them to submit to the market and sell it. I mean, it can be a bit tragic, but I think it's thinking outside of the box and opening up other possibilities and options. And another very interesting case is B residencies. I will show you a bit more of them later. But B residencies, it's a kind of artistic project in the shape of a residency. And in here, the organizers host the residents in their own summer houses, like in their dachas. So the dacha suddenly becomes this space that allows anyone to become a host, to receive people. And it's incredible how much they've done with so little. But I think now they're at this point where they want to either professionalize or discontinue because of that incredible invisible labor that goes into operating this type of spaces. I think it's also important to understand where are these spaces located in relation to the rest of the city. Are we talking about the outskirts? For example, Shoshenko 33, which doesn't feel like you're in Kyiv at all. Or are we talking something really, really central, like the case of Sesame, the residency we're organizing in Slavutic, which is right in the center of the city. It's quite a small place, but still it's as central as it gets. And how does that position affect your work with others? I think it's also interesting if the space perhaps can maybe embed certain rituals. Maybe there is an idea of leaving a mark, a painting, leaving some kind of trace of residents that have gone, so that this idea of community is not something that of people sharing time and space, but also that can go across times and across different time scales, reflecting on previous residents. And then lastly is the last scale is more like the ether. So basically dissemination. Where are you posting? Where are you disseminating the work for your residency? Which channels are you using? Are you making an open call or an invitation-only residency? What networks are you tapping into? So there are several large platforms with free resources. Art Daily, Le Club des Opportunités, On the Move, newsletters. Oh, I think there are some slides that didn't make it. Also people that can act as maxi spreaders. So they are, influencers, or they have a very large following. Universities are also very, very good places to disseminate open calls. And then, of course, paid resources like eFlux. And I think in this type of situations, what is important as a residency organizer is to ask yourself, what kind of exposure do I want? Do I want exposure? Who am I looking for? And who is looking for me? So where can I find people that are interested in the project that I am interested in realizing, that are aligned with my mission or that are aligned with my values? Often your audiences are limited by funding, as I've explained before, but how do we navigate that? I think there are some slides that didn't make it, but it's okay. I'll see. I'll go to the next part, and then I'll see if I can retrieve them again. The next is like, how do we start thinking about or running our residency? So what kind of team do you need? As a residency organizer, you absolutely wear a lot of hats, especially when you are doing it yourself. So of course, there is a lot of marketing and PR for distributing the open call. You're of course a curator because you are formulating an idea, a mission statement, you're organizing an event. There is a great deal of curation with that. You are for sure an accountant as soon as there is money or even in-kind contributions coming in. You are definitely a community manager dealing with people's personalities and weird desires. So in terms of logistics and based on my experience, I suggest that there are two types of main tasks for the organization of DIY residencies. And these main tasks can be boiled down to money and communication. And I think there are like three phases. So the first phase would be before the residents arrive. So money has all to do with like bookkeeping, receipts, designing a cash flow. This is very, very important, the design of the cash flow, because very often, whatever awarding body you get, it's normally they withhold 20% of that grant that you're getting to invite your residents, blah, 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 until the final report is submitted. So normally you need to make a decision of who are going to be the actors that you are going to pay with the final 20%. How is that cash flow going to be distributed? So it's definitely, yeah, a lot of questions. The next one is, I'm just gonna show you, for example, oh, you know what? Yeah, I just think that these slideshows, let me bring them over here. I don't know why they're not loading. I'll just... sorry, just one more minute. Okay, it's just, yeah, cool. Okay, it's just really weird. It's as if like someone had like reshuffled some of the slides, but I'm not sure how anyone could do that. But anyways, I think now you can see the slides as they are. I'll go on present mode. Okay. Can you see it full screen? Yes, okay. So basically, in terms of like these money matters that I was discussing, this is how just a template for a budget that we normally use for our residencies, how it looks like. So basically, in this template, we would have 4 columns and is both a bit of a cash flow as well as a budget. So in these 4 columns, we have the minimum budget we need, so the minimum planned expenses. Without these expenses, basically, we do not have a residency. The ideal budget, so probably in this budget, we normally include paying residents or paying them more or having more production budget or whatever. Then the type of funding, and the thing is that often funding is allocated to different lines of the budget. So sometimes they pay for overheads, sometimes they do not pay for overheads. So, and then finally, the actual expenses. So normally what we would do is have in here, how do you call it? Operations, like calculations embedded in the Excel that will automatically update and tell us if we're going in the red or not. And in this first column here, we would list out all the things we need. And we have 2 times. The red line is when the residents arrive. So all the things we need to pay for before they arrive, and below that red line, all the things we need to pay for after they arrive. And then in the funding, we write what we are getting from where and when. So if we would be getting this, if we're able to pay for this, for the roof in this case, okay, we'll be able to get it at that point or whatever. So then this is when the residents arrive. Again, and we split this in terms of more production-based as well as human needs. So human needs would be things like meals and, well, in this case, it's like toilets and a bar or whatever, transport, and workshop would be more to do with like production, the type of production that we're talking about. And then the total numbers that we have. This is an unfinished budget because this is for a residency that was scheduled for last year that didn't happen. And before residents arrive, again, residents need to, the person in charge of communication is in charge of PR, being in touch with applicants. It's very, very important to send out emails to all applicants about the selection results, not just to the selected ones. And we always make a point about sending personalized messages, even if you get 100 applications. We just think it's a matter of respect, like people took a lot of time to apply. And although it takes a lot of time to reply to people individually, it definitely is something that we have received a lot of appraisal for from people who have not been selected in the past. But I think it's also showing a certain element of a certain level of respect and decency towards your applicants and people who are definitely interested. But also talking to different stakeholders in a timely manner. If you're going to have people who are going to be presenting or giving lectures or neighbors involved or volunteers, so preparing all that. So for that person, we would have a table like this one, which is a Google spreadsheet. We normally work everything on Google because it has this kind of automated update where we would draw out a calendar and explain who is in charge of what task, confirm, not confirm, whether there are technical requirements and things that need to be prepared administratively. This gives a great overview also in terms of knowing and understanding the human resources that need to be mobilized. And depending on the nature of your residency, but if your residency has any form of public program, you will definitely need to have a table similar to this one. Here we also keep everything. So instead of having different files, we keep all the file, like as much information in one file, just on different tabs. So the past models, this is part of our public programs. This is the people who are staying at hotels. How are we putting them in hotels? The production from the workshops that we need. And this is more like a general overview where we try to aggregate all the data from all the different tables. But I would say that then the lecturer's table would have all the contact information for the lecturers and things like that. This type of tool is very, very important because as you get closer to your residency, you can easily incorporate people to help you by just giving them access to this one document, and they, rather than having them scoop through emails to find someone's contact details. So then the second phase is when residents have arrived. So in terms of the money, you will need to be keeping tabs for the production budget, ensuring that residents receive their not per dreams, no per DMs, making security copies of receipts for final reporting, because if those receipts disappear, your funding body might not return you that 20% that they keep until the end. And my advice is that you start reporting as you go along. So try to do it with every receipt you receive, particularly if you are engaged in a residency that involves some production. It is also very, very important that you calculate bank transfers and withdrawal times. As a resident, there's been many, many times where I have been left with no money in a very vulnerable position for maybe a week, because whoever was organizing the residency did not calculate the 3 or 4 days that it takes to send money from one country to another, plus a bank holiday, plus whatever. And you don't want to leave artists who are already vulnerable, being in an environment that is not necessarily theirs, in that super precarious position. Then as well, of course, you need to calculate FOBs if you're working in Ukraine. So how are you withdrawing money? How are you getting money out? And now in Ukraine, a lot of funding bodies ask you to have a legal tender competition, so you cannot just assign certain tasks to people. So these are also two hurdles that you need to be aware of when designing your money strategy while your residents are there. Then in terms of the communication person should be in charge of the parallel program, inviting guests, attending to the needs of the residents, organizing a touch-based sessions with everyone. So I think these things are important, particularly these sessions where all the residents come together. Depending on the duration and the nature of your residency, I would suggest that to have a minimum of one session a week where everyone talks about what they're working, or like has a bit more of a serious talk, as well as like several informal meetings throughout the week. Pizza, dinners, picnics, walks in the forest. All of these things are very, very important to create community. Often residents are people that don't know anyone. All of their social networks have been, physical social networks have been uplifted and removed, and they are just, on their own, connected to their life through social media. So I think it's very important to take care of those social needs and to establish a series of touch-based sessions. And the third and last point for these two tasks would be when the residents leave. So, of course, finish filling out the report, that last 20%. It is very, very important, as I said, to do this as you go along, and is definitely the worst part of organizing a residency. It's so bad that I normally always outsource it, because it's just something, you need to be very, very dedicated to it. And then, of course, documentation for the event. But I think there is also, it's very interesting if you have the opportunity to think of some kind of aftercare, some kind of WhatsApp group, maybe, I don't know, create and establish bridges. How do you care for your residents, or what kind of connections do you build? So since we're talking about how to create this residency, and I've already talked a lot about so many hurdles that you will inevitably face when trying to produce a residency, I wanted to talk about the Trojan horses, or the strategies that you could engage with in order to produce, to kind of avoid some of these hurdles. So how to circumnavigate the legal frameworks, particularly around funding restrictions that have to do with national origin or expenditure lines. As I said, not every funding, for example, funding, sometimes they don't want to pay for people's salaries, or they are not interested in paying for people who are not from a specific country. As I was saying earlier, Res Artists ran an informal research in 2013 where they contacted 134 artist residency spaces, and over half of them received only public funding. 34, it was a mixture of public and private, and 22 was public and self-generated. So I don't know, maybe 7 did not rely on public funding at all, which is very, very interesting when you think about how dependent on governmental support art residencies always are. And of course, this puts residencies in a very precarious or a very in a position where they have to submit often to governmental agendas. These are some things that governments really care about: the nationality, the outcomes, the duration, the format, the documentation, how much money is spent. Things that absolutely can commodify this experience, commodify the encounter, and can be definitely used to justify expenditure. So Trojan horses are elements that help us navigate these loopholes, but do not compromise our mission or goals. So they basically, a Trojan horse really lies at the intersection of the benefit that you're gonna get versus how much compromise you're willing to commit without it not being beneficial to you, and against, of course, your mission statements. These funding hurdles can affect not only the way we navigate loopholes, but also affect entire cultural ecosystems. As I was saying before, it's very, very common for this type of national bodies, Goethe Institute, Pro Helvetia, Alliance Française, British Council, to pay for their own artists to come to you rather than international or like an international diaspora come to those countries. Of course, this type of process also happens, but it's not exactly reciprocal. Cité Internationale des Arts receives funding from the French government to bring people from all over the world to Paris, but they are also very actively sending French people abroad, particularly through Alliance Française and many other programs. And I think it is important because we need to be also aware of what kind of also power dynamics and power lines these things reinforce. So I'm going to give an example of a Trojan horse that we established, my partner and I, my partner at Metacito and I. So we were interested in working with degrowth and definitely working with cities that were degrowing in terms of that had population degrowth, post-industrial centers. And we're interested in working with local communities and like local gatekeepers, like stakeholders that were working in organizations in those towns. So for that, as artists, there is no way we could have ever received artistic grants to develop this project. Instead, we had to institutionalize ourselves, our practice, by registering ourselves as the Degrowth Institute officially as an NGO in Ukraine. The second we were registered as an NGO in Ukraine, suddenly all of these other gates opened for us to apply for funding. Bear in mind that we were still the same two people, two artists, and we were just calling ourselves now NGO. And we could tap into all of these different resources. Of course, this was very, very interesting because one of the resources we tapped into was the Tandem Turkey project, where they took cultural workers, NGOs basically, people working in NGOs in different parts of, in Ukraine and in Turkey, and exchanged them. Now, I think people participated from Dovzhenko Film Center, for example, or Salt Art Center in Istanbul, like real institutions. But we were also invited to participate. And they sent these two guys from a film festival in Turkey, and that were working at a film festival in Turkey, to our office in Ukraine to learn and to see how we were working. And of course, this was absolutely insane for them because we were artists, and it was like just seeing how these two artists are organizing their DIY residency under the auspice of being an NGO. But yeah, I think basically this type of strategy was a strategy that really helped us to gain access to this type of resources, and we're very open about it. And it was insane how just a bit of bureaucracy could suddenly really open all of these things. Another one was 86 Urbanism Festival. So when we had this urban residency, we had very strict funding from Visegrad and from a bunch of different countries, including the British Council, that wanted us to work with the countries that were reflected in the master plan of Slavutic. So instead of working with nationals of those countries, an idea that we kind of had to go around that was to ask for people that were from, residing in, or familiar with the cities that were present in the master plan of Slavutic. Slavutic has 13 districts, and each district was designed by a different Soviet republic in 1987, and then the districts were named subsequently with the capitals of those republics. So the Baku district was built by Azerbaijani architects and masons, and the Riga district by Latvian architects and masons. So instead of asking for Latvian participants, we're asking for people that were from, residing in, familiar with these cities, which plus the Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary from Visegrad, which opened up to a lot more people being able to apply and to be a bit more flexible in terms of these applications. I think this idea of the nation state and how it comes in and intervenes in the making of the residency is something that Reshape has really thought about. They organized this transnational, postnational workshop. It's on their website. I really advise you to have a look, because it's insane how much this Westphalian concept of the nation state is present when we are working with residencies. Another format that I found really interesting is the idea of exchange. More and more organizations are doing this, where they are able to provide a space and some funding for a local, like in their space, and then someone in that space. So then they swap. It's a kind of Airbnb of kind of a swap, exchange swap. You can check in ArtQuest, Artelier. It's one of the resources. I will re-update these presentations on the Miro so that you have the right slides. I just wanted to give like an overview of some of the funds that have been very active financing residency programs in the past in Ukraine. So one of them has been the British Council. Now the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation is extremely generous in terms of their funding, very, very active. So definitely check them out if you're thinking of opening your own residency. Visegrad Fund, as I said. The Goethe Institute is, of all the national kind of culture institutes, in my experience, is the most flexible. They do not necessarily expect a lot of German in whatever proposal you're coming up with, as well as other funds that are a lot less flexible but tend to give money, such as PIFE for Spanish participants, for Helvetia for Swiss, Alliance Française for the French. National embassies can help, in my experience, only covering travel costs, and you need to inform them before they make the budget for the end of the year. So my advice is think about December or April. It depends. It varies from country to country, but in my experience, we've been very lucky. Estonia, the Estonian embassy in Ukraine, the Swiss embassy in Ukraine, the German embassy in Ukraine, they have all funded for residents from those countries to come for just to cover the travel costs. And in that sense, it's very, very important to consider the funding cycles because you will need some preparation, sometimes more than a year. Lastly, money. So artists are very often very, very vulnerable. There is a lot of job precarity, lack of social security. And this is added to the fact that they are in a new context when they are residents. So how do we ensure that they are protected? What do we cover? And how much do we cover? Is it in cash or in kind? Are you just giving artists cash and they have to rent their own apartment? Or are you giving them an apartment? Are you giving them per diems or are you providing them with food? So I think designing your financial structure is very, very important. Are your artists being paid and for what are they being paid? Is it production or is it for a fee for producing? Are you informing applicants of the conditions during the open call or only when inviting them? I personally think that from an ethical standpoint, you should always inform about everything that is being covered and how much is being covered on the open calls. Not every residency follows this, but I don't think that's good practice. I think applicants need to be informed what will be covered and how much. And also, do you cover things that might not be considered necessarily ethical, such as, for example, short distance flights or not vegan common meals? A lot of institutions are starting to withdraw from this type of coverage. So, for example, HIAP in Helsinki, they do not cover short distance flights. The European Cultural Foundation, as well as HIAP, and I can only think of these two, maybe Mondrian Fund as well. Right now, they do not cover meals that are not vegan out of climate change concerns. So I think it is also very interesting for you to think how through what you are covering, you're also making a statement and you are also advancing your mission. And how do you communicate that intention? Your identity, the organization's identity, how is it communicated and perceived? So, I mean, of course, open studios are a very common thing, collateral practices, press releases, social media, places like the Delfina Foundation in London, they are very active on social media, trying to build some kind of reputation for the prestige of their program, highlighting the success of applicants that have gone through their program. Word of mouth. The Directory of Alternative Practices is also a great one. They provide a whole series of different mobility and DIY residency opportunities is in the resource star, as well as through your website. Like, for example, Monfradat, as soon as you enter, you have the general eligibility criteria. Monfradat, for those of you who do not know, is an organization that provides residency support for Arab artists, and this is very much indicated. Their third point is to be a contemporary arts living in the Arab world or be relevant in the region. HIAP in Helsinki, through their website, as I was mentioning before, they make a whole point about ecological travel, and not only they make a point about ecological travel, but they also use this as an opportunity to communicate micro stories of their residents. So, for example, when they send residents from Helsinki to Venice, or someone taking the Trans-Siberian to get to Helsinki, or through artistic work. This is, again, the example of B. B is a fantastic residency. I really recommend that for those of you explore it further. I think is very much set within the framework of an art project. So they are really pushing the boundaries of what a residency is. And their statement is B has no budget, no exhibition venue, no curator, no pavilion, no communication, no competition, no attendance, no entrance fee, no website, no catalog, no opening, no age limit, no nationality, no experience, no visitors, no opening hours, no institutions, no ambitions, no futures, unprecedented. Basically, B started with 3 artists that were offering their dacha as moments to create community and create bonds between artists. I think it's very interesting because they've been quite successful, and with time their practice has been more and more institutionalized, and now they have support to cover certain things. But I think what is very interesting is that they always try to challenge everything about the residency. So for example, the open call, the application must be sent by email to this without any attached file, no resume, no portfolio, no project, no motivation letter, no reference letter, no field form attached, no any kind of document explaining the candidate's practice, which of course opens a lot of questions, like how do these people select the residents? What is this residence for? But of course, they are taking this radical stance because it's also making a comment against this type of rat race in the residency world, to outshine, to differentiate one's practice in a very large cosmos. I don't know. Well, anyways, the last time they had an open call, it was not a text document, but a video, a 6-minute video of a series of random things that happened, and you had to really pay attention to find out what were the slots that they were accepting residents. So again, this is a great example of a DIY residency, and I think that they are very much embedded in that radicality realm that I was indicating at the beginning of today's workshop. But I mean, the radicality is they're criticizing the art system. Now, I think that if you are intending to open a DIY residency in a post-industrial center, your radicality can even further be accentuated because of the location where you are. Right. And then the last of today would be the who, the selection process. I don't know if there are any questions, but I will go very quickly through this and we can have a short discussion at the end. So the who is like selection process, a jury. And who is the jury? How do you select your residents? Who do you select for your jury? I think this is also very important because in terms of like the people, I think my advice would be, think of like, who is this residency for? Who would you like to have? And who will be able to provide you with a lens that is different from what you have yourself. So who are you inviting? Of course, not only a diverse, as jury, not only a diverse demographic, but also who can provide a unique, who can see things that you can't from the applications. Who does your jury select? Do you pay your jury? Often juries are unpaid, but this is again another form of labor, yet again, that adds up to the labor, invisible labor in the residency world that goes unpaid. So looking for ways to seek for fairness and accountability in the selection process, I would say is of paramount importance. I think there's been many attempts. For example, there is this residency project in Bergen that removes the human factor, and all residents are selected through an algorithm. So as an applicant, you apply and then you select people, other applicants, everything is open and you can see other applications and you select other applicants that you would like to be in residency with. And then the algorithm finds if you have chosen someone and someone has also chosen you, like a bit on Tinder, if there is a super match, the algorithm favors that, and then the residents are selected. So it's not about quality or it's not about a human factor, but rather applicants selecting themselves. In our case, we always do it by rewarding incidents. So this is how an average jury selection sheet would look like. In this case, it was for a project where we had to have half of the participants from Ukraine and the other half Ukraine international, which is why we had this column here. And then basically we had a tab at the bottom of this Google sheet for each of the jury members. Each of the jury members went through all the applications and then they made their rank. They commented. This person, for some reason, didn't comment much, but normally they fill out the comment boxes. And then afterwards, we accrued all the votes. So basically, we see where in the ranking of each of these people, each applicant was. So this line here will be the applicants. So we see, okay, the Meta C2, us as jury, we put this candidate number 12, this one number 10, this one number 4, blah, blah, blah. So these were these 4 columns, this one, this one, this one, and this one will be the jury members. So then we added, here there is an automatic calculation that adds all the points of all of these cells. And then here, we multiplied by the amount of times that this applicant has been selected by a jury member. Because if I select someone, because we believe that if someone is in the radar of everyone in the jury, but maybe they are not in a very high position, this is something that maybe needs to be rewarded, as well as if someone ends up in first position. So by multiplying the amount of incidents or the amount of times they appear in the rankings, we are able to get a grand total. And then with that grand total, we tally all the points and then we obtain our ranking. And then this is going back to that question of collectives or not. In this case, some of these people came in collectives. So then we start calculating, okay, so the first ones here were 2 people, then 1 person, then 2 people, then another person at the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. So that way we are able to obtain the final result. As part of our experimentation, this is the last example I'll share with you today. We were also looking into how could we do a blind selection. So we did a project called Foundation, where basically we invited 6 artists to live together in an art gallery in Germany for 1 week. And the application process was completely anonymous. The artists just had to answer 4 questions. One of them was an image and 3 narrative questions. And then there was a jury that selected people based on the questions, and artists submitted a pseudonym, and then those pseudonyms were published on our website. And then when they applied, they had to submit a pseudonym and a secret word. So when they got in touch with us, they said, hey, I'm a businesswoman, and my secret word was whatever. And we had their secret word from the application. And the point of Foundation, it was an artistic project in the form of a residency. It was to form an artificial community very fast by having 6 people living together without leaving a space, incarcerated in this gallery for 7 days without internet, without contacting the outside world, and just building the foundations of a new community together. And we had a cameraman that would come in and record. It was a bit like LARPing, but or Big Brother. But anyways, so in this case, we really wanted to make it about selecting anonymous people that were selected because of affinity rather than falling into pretenses of career or production. And this is the video, but I think it's also, the video is also on the Miro board. So maybe you can have a look at it at your own time. Okay, so basically this was it in terms of tools. There is one more thing that I wanted to share because it didn't show up on those slides. But as I said, I will update these good slides to the Miro. I don't know what the problem was. But basically, this is a whole series of websites where I would advise you to look for residencies. Res Artis is very, very good. Le Club des Opportunités, the Facebook is on the link. Trans Artists is great. On the Move is very good. So yeah, these are kind of resources for you to look at where to find residency opportunities for yourself, but also if you decide to create your own DIY residency, how can you take it out to the world? Okay, cool. I don't know if there are any questions at this point or any comments. Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, I think this is all for us today. I mean, I thought maybe a final discussion that perhaps I was thinking, since we were expecting a lot more people, I had design activities that really required a mob. So one of the activities that I was thinking could have been interesting for us to do together would be reflecting on the application process. How can we ensure fairness in the application process? I would say that 95% of residencies operate under a very similar model, which is submission of a portfolio, artist statement, plan for the residency. But I think this is a model that is full of pitfalls. And I think that maybe, hopefully, if you are having a DIY residency, you are taking that as an opportunity to perhaps be very radical in terms of the challenging those models, a bit like B did it, or we tried to do it in Foundation. Yeah.
You were saying like about the cons, like the pitfalls you said.
Mm-hmm.
This type of application, could you tell more like about from your experience, like what are the downsides of this type of system?
So I think that, for example, when you are asking someone to come up with a residency plan or a project for a residency, particularly in a context where they've never been to, we are often generating or creating an environment for parachuting people in with bizarre assumptions about a place. Some Wikipedia research base their entire residency strategy about it. And of course, once they are on site, that residency plan can be challenged or whatever. But because there is so much pressure for producing, that is often not the case. So I think, I tend to favor more residency projects that either if you are proposing a project for the residency that maybe does not necessarily have, that you're not forcing residencies to relate it immediately to a context, but maybe also to their own practice, which they will be a lot more knowledgeable about, and they will know much more how to gauge the expectations. rather than a context. I personally also feel that often in the case of residencies in post-industrial centers, people have ultimately a very kind of a type of fetish, a fetish for ruined pornography, for large industrial infrastructure that is not in use anymore. And whereas those things are definitely very interesting and very cool, post-industrial centers have a lot more to offer. And I feel that often residencies that ask residents to engage with post-industrial centers before they go, like to propose a residency plan before, can fall into these very stereotypical pitfalls. Great. I don't know if there are any other questions.
I have one question.
Hi,
Maybe
Seth.
there is a network of exclusively like post-industrial residencies, not in general, but specifically with this topic who are working with post-industrial sites.
Not to my knowledge, but I think that's such a great idea. I actually think that, it's a super good idea, and maybe actually Izoliacja could play a very nodal role in that, in terms of like triggering that type of network, and not just in Ukraine, but beyond, because I think that there is absolutely a need for this type of conversations to happen. As I said, in Ukraine, a lot of residencies are not recurring residencies, but rather, people applying for one grant, they get it, they do the residency. So of course, it is difficult to establish a network like that. But still, maybe it's not about a network about residency events, but it's more a network of people that are in the loop or interested in this type of residencies. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I think Izoliacja, with the incredible work it's done already, in terms of like Mariupol is now in Solidar, I think definitely would be in a great position to take the lead for starting this network. And as I said, I don't think it should be just restricted to Ukraine, because I know of post-industrial residencies happening in Georgia, in Germany with Oberhausen, in Spain, Ponderosa in Germany again. I think in the US, loads of centers as well. So I think this, definitely could be something really, really powerful. And it would be very interesting also to understand how to further expand the discourse and the possibilities that these residencies offer. Because as I said, to me, this is the most radical act to bring people to places that are shrinking, that are literally losing people. And to put these places in some kind of like cognitive map. This was, for example, my intention with Slavutic, with Sesame. To me, as an architect, Slavutic is an incredible masterpiece. I don't think there is any city in the world that can compare in terms of its historical importance for architectural modernism, created after Chernobyl, late modernism, beautiful, beautiful architectural examples. I do not know a single architect that has been to Slavutic and not liked it. And as an example, Dom Publishers in Germany, which publishes architectural guides, the first architectural guide they published about Ukraine was about Slavutic, written by Zhenya Gubkina. So my intention was, of course, I'm not interested in whatever crap people build in a month, whatever. I mean, it's a pavilion, it's going to be destroyed within weeks. That's also problematic, but that's for another conversation, but whatever. But what I'm interested is about bringing people to Slavutic, and that Slavutic suddenly is in a map, that suddenly people are able to see this, because I feel that this way we are escaping these hegemonic narratives that are given to us in terms of like what cities or space or good urban practice is. So I think this is quite exciting.
Yeah, that's nice. We also, with Misha, we were talking about this, how to make, we could make some kind of network, but about the post-industrial sites and partners in Ukraine. But if there is an idea also to spread it on the wider, it's also, if there is no such an idea, we could just work on it.
Yeah, I think, and you know, like even part of, I'm just trying to think now in terms of like what that program could entail. I think maybe it could also be that Izoliatia provides certain funds for people, for stakeholders in these cities that want to start their own residencies, like a one-off residency. Because this is something, okay, this might be a bit more unique to the Ukrainian context in my experience, that people are so dedicated to improving urban space. But there are so many of these kind of activists or people that started NGOs or organizations. And I think that often what throws them back or what prevents them from starting a residency, it's the logistics of applying or the uncertainty of applying to the Goethe Institute or to the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. But I think if Izoliatia could act as that kind of interface, maybe Izoliatia could apply with this project to the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation and then select participants. I think this would be genius.
Thank you. Thank you for the workshop. It was really nice and it was really great because I really also write in my PhD also on the topic of post-industrial sites. So it's really,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really helpful and to know all the practices you were talking about, and it was really interesting. And this idea, I think we were talking with Misha about this idea to make such an initiative from Izoliatia. So maybe we could talk about it.
Yeah, I think this would be really, really great. Amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm exhausted with talking so much, but on the bright side, I talked about things I thought I would not have time to talk about because we would have to do these exercises. So this was great. Sorry, Natalia, do you have anything to say?
Так, теж дякую за корисний матеріал і сподіваюсь, те, про що говорила Саша і Едуардо, можна втілити в нашому місті. Якраз воно підходить 100% під це.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. I also hope so. I also know in Energodar, these people also organizing kind of micro residencies. And again, Energodar, wow, what an incredible place to have one of these events. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Just I hope you keep the access to the Miro board and that you are able to use the resources. I have my email in that intro box, so if anyone wants to get in touch, do get in touch. If anyone wants to chat longer or after in the Telegram app, they can. And I would be so happy if Sasha and Misha's initiative does come true, of establishing this network of DIY residencies in post-industrial cities. Pioneering as always. Thank you, everyone.